This is Solside Up. I'm your host, Sol. Welcome to an hour of beautiful conversation. Open your heart and enjoy. Hello everyone, this is Solside Up and I'm Sol. And today I am extremely happy and grateful that Maurice Fernandez wanted to join me here on my pod. Hello Maurice, how are you doing?
Hello. Tak.
Tak.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Neptunian times indeed.
Absolutely. And we go a long way. You know, like I've been, I ran into your forum. I remember in the beginning of the internet days, you had this beautiful blue forum on the internet, and that was before Facebook, was a thing. And that forum was, it was really a marvelous place. There were a lot of astrologers there, and some of them I still keep in touch with. And then the book came, the Neptune book. Maurice wrote 2 books based on evolutionary astrology, and the first one was the Neptune book, and that was in 2004, if I don't remember. Yeah, well, I remember it because my son was born right there. And
right.
Yeah. And I had Neptune. He's born with Neptune on my son. And I got it. I was really quick at getting it because I always wanted to figure out Neptune. It's a complicated archetype, and it's and I previously I had read Liz Green's gigantic book of Neptune. Have you seen it? It's a thick thing. And it was very interesting, but I felt something was missing. So I ordered your book immediately. And while I was breastfeeding my son, being completely foggy and like, ooh, what day is it? You have no idea what day it is when you're breastfeeding. I read this book about Neptune and timelessness and, everything that pertains to Neptune. And it was really a game changer in my astrological practice. So, but you edited it now, right? You have a new version?
Yeah, so I'll share the screen. I'll show. This is the new edition, which was published in 2018, so about 14 years after the initial release. And as you can see, the title says Neptune, the 12th house, and Pisces. So part of my evolutionary perspective is that there is an immediate correlation between Neptune and the sign of Pisces and the 12th house. And it, like you say, it's a very difficult archetype to understand. And I think that's why it's often misinterpreted in astrology, especially when you read about the 12th house, and usually very depressing connections. So the attempt in this book and in my body of knowledge is to basically bring clarity to understand what this force is about, and understand why it's so hard to understand, because it works on so many different layers at the same time.
Yeah, well, that's both you and me, we are EA, evolutionary astrologers. And the thing that really drew me into EA was particularly the rich body of knowledge around the outer planets, and that was, in my experience, lacking from the previous sources of knowledge that I had explored. So this particular book I see as a true legacy to the whole body of work that is now currently being communicated and expressed through the work of many good astrologers. But definitely this book is a must-have if you want to understand Pisces and the 12th house and Neptune.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. And this book came in a very Neptunian way, which is often, Neptune brings us beyond what we can control. And it was a book that was truly inspired. I never thought about writing a book on Neptune. But when I needed to present a talk on Neptune and start taking notes, and then a floodgate opened, and I started to write and write and write, and I was learning as I was writing. That was the fascinating thing, is that I was writing things that I didn't know.
Mm.
So Neptune was squaring my sun at the time.
It was, yeah, but yeah, that's yeah. Mm.
Um, I agree with you that the outer planets are so important, and I do also believe that part of the premise of EA is to understand the balance of free will and fate.
Mm.
So when we have the regular planets, when I say regular, is the visible planets, including the sun and the moon up to Saturn, mostly they represent what we're building, constructing. It's how to survive, and how, who you are and how you do things and who you're connecting with. So all the planets up to Saturn are really about establishing your reality and then succeeding in your reality. But when you start to move into Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and more planets have been added since then, but especially as those three, you move into doubt, destruction, and for the sake of change. So naturally, these three outer planets challenge security. And
Yeah.
the purpose is to expand consciousness. And that's the premise of evolutionary astrology, is we want to understand not just how to live well and how to, have a good relationship and whatnot, but then how life forces us to question and to redefine our own lives over and over again. So even if we speak about reincarnation and the fact that the soul is constantly learning new things and needs to rewrite its own script, we can say that the outer planet bring multiple incarnation in this life. Like you are rewriting, reinventing yourself, but because of these challenges. And so it's very different from the initial planets, which were about building
Mm.
and
Definitely.
defining and
Mm.
grounding. Now you're destroying and you're reinventing, building something new.
You can especially see that with Pluto transits. I feel like with Pluto transits, it's like you're cleaning out the karma of many lifetimes in one transit. It's like it's bringing up so much old into the psyche, into the conscious awareness, that feels really like timeless. So whenever, like the way that I see it is that, Saturn is the last visible planet to the eye, and it's kind of defining the physical world. It's 1 and 1 is 2. But immediately when you step into the realms of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, it's purely metaphysical. There's a whole level of, it's a different dimension, actually. It's for time. Time is kind of collapsing at that point. So past, present, and now it's just coming together, like some sort of metaphysical reality that opens up. And I think, especially Neptune, it taught me how to communicate with the flow. Something that I really found interesting with that book, the title of the book, the first book that I have, here. It's here. I actually read a little bit in it before we started it because of the current transits that we're going to talk about a little bit later. And what I thought is so good, because that says the end of hope, the beginning of truth. That's the subtitle of this book. And that's, it's been in my mind for years, because it's so easy to entertain illusions. It's so easy to lie to yourself. It's so easy to, and you see also how the collective ideals sometimes are a little bit, they're not always in accordance with natural law, like what the truth of everything, which is a more it's and you mention it in this book. Truth is relative to the moment, to your evolutionary level where you are. Because something can be true today, and then next year it's not the same. That will apply.
That's a relative truth, the relativity of truth. And the relativity of truth depends on your consciousness.
Yes.
And that's actually not a Neptune thing. It's more of a Saturn thing. Because Neptune speaks about the truth that is there whether you get it or not, whether you have the capacity to grasp it or not. And so I renamed the subtitle, The Timelessness of Truth. And what this means is that even though, like you say, we have different perspectives, when you are living in Norway, you have a different weather, you have different environmental condition than someone who lives in the Sahara. So you're all each going to interpret existence differently based on your local conditions. But there's one thing. What Neptune represents is what remains constant through time, through cultures. It doesn't matter if you are in the desert or if you are in Scandinavia or if you are in a jungle. It doesn't matter if you're a Jew or an Arab or person of color. Neptune represents what is always true for everybody at all time and will always be. So there is a constant. And what is the constant? The truth. Throughout the ages, people have fought battles and people have claimed that my religion is better than yours. But what are they fighting about? They're fighting about trying to control the truth, trying to own the truth. But the truth cannot be owned. And it doesn't belong to anyone. It's something that unites us beyond time. One of the expression of the truth is love. And so love is the same anywhere, anytime. This is a constant as well. It doesn't change with civilization. It doesn't change with migration. It doesn't change with the weather. It's always going to be there, and it's a unifying principle. But even beyond love, the most fundamental thing that is timeless and is beyond our differences, it's beyond separation, is truth. And Neptune represents how we communicate with that, how we deal with that. And of course, the most challenging aspect is how do we deal with the things we don't know about the truth. We speak about evolution. Evolution is time oriented, right? I am now evolving and I'm going to reincarnate in another time, another place, and I'm going to go through different experiences. And each time will teach me something, like a piece of the puzzle. And so I get another piece to the puzzle and another piece to the puzzle. But Neptune is the whole picture. It's what we're trying to piece together. And if we look at astrology, the most simple way to understand it is what makes our chart. It's time and space. You're born at a certain date, at a certain place, and where the planets were at that time will tell us, if your sun is in Sagittarius or whatever sign and what aspects it's going to make. So your chart is a moment in time and space. And each one of us takes that moment and lives it for a whole incarnation.
That's a beautiful way of seeing it. Yeah.
So, I'm now a Scorpio and I'm going to live that. But what is Neptune saying? Neptune's saying you are all the signs.
Yeah.
You are all the planets. So right now you have a little bit more of this and a little less of that. and you're going to be challenged, with those different angles. But the truth is, we're all dealing with the same components, with the same ingredients.
Yeah.
And Neptune says, basically, Neptune says there is a reality beyond your chart.
Hmm.
The moment you go beyond time, you don't live your chart anymore.
Well,
Interestingly.
yeah, well, that reminds me of something that was written in one of the first books I read on meditation. Actually, it was by a woman called Guru Mai Chidvilisananda, and one of the opening phrases in that book was, "There will be a point in your evolution when you will not be affected by the motion of the planets. Like you're beyond that kind of." Um, duality in a way. There's like a more non-dual experience of life where you are finding some sort of eternal still point inside of yourself. And I think, especially when it comes to the spiritual path, we often talk about Neptune as being a very spiritualizing quality in the chart. You have to reach beyond your ego very often when you are exposed to something Neptunian. There's a sense of boundaries being opened, and maybe also experiences of having timelessness. There are levels of experiencing life, and some of them are completely beyond time. And there was this experience I had with a teacher of mine. He was fairly highly evolved, and he said that, well, the path is the path. It's the same path for everyone. There's just one path. And it doesn't matter what kind of words that are being inspired or like the teachings they come through, but the mystic will walk one path, and they will go through a lot of the same initiations on the spiritual level and have a lot of the same experiences, even though they might explain it differently through their preferred languages. And then again, you come back to the multitude of religions on our planet, but they all talk about the same. In many ways, the essence remains the same.
And that's, if we compare, for example, the two water signs, Pisces and Cancer, and the moon. So the moon represents your filter. It's how you're going to absorb something. If I tell you war, you will have a certain trigger reaction that's going to be your reality, how you respond to it. Or if I tell you, the color yellow, some people will like it, some people won't like it. So the moon is based on all your history and where your circumstances. How are you personally internalizing every impression, every experience? And that also determines what you're going to do with your life and the path you're going to choose. And again, we look at our charts. One of the great value of astrology is I can tell you, Sul, that is right for you. You should be doing this work. And part of your evolutionary journey is, to face those challenges in relationship, to face those challenges, and these are your gifts, so forth. However, when we speak about Neptune, we speak about the common denominators. And you're right to say that most spiritual philosophies and body of knowledge will tell you to transcend time, will tell you to transcend the personal. Don't get caught in your emotion, because the moon is your emotions. And the emotions are the way you digest life. It's your digestive system. So Neptune tells you, on the one hand, that's not the complete picture, but that is often why it's so misunderstood, is that there's one part of Neptune that says, go beyond the self, go beyond time, and understand that there is a greater reality, and all the people you hate, they're you. All the things that you fight, they're part of there are pieces of you as well. It's all part of this puzzle. However, if we speak about Neptune, we speak about the forces of creation, what came before us. I call it the womb of the universe, before you were born.
Yeah, the 12th house you mentioned in the book,
Exactly.
the house that precedes the ascendant.
And so the ascendant is when you push away from your mother and you become yourself. It's how you are going to take charge of your destiny. Whereas the 12th house is where you're coming from. And all of us remember that place, because how do we even want to be spiritual? Is because there's something in us that was there. There's a memory. However, we have to ask ourselves the question, okay, we have to transcend the ego, we have to transcend time, but who made time? And who gave us an ego? And why are we fighting that? We go into this dichotomy, that duality. We speak about trying to be non-dual, but by wanting to transcend and to move beyond the ego, we're actually fostering, creating duality.
Yeah,
and part of the premise that I have, about this teaching and about the influence of Neptune is that we're not supposed to go back to the womb. You're not going back to mommy's womb or to the universal womb. And that's where everything, keeps being misunderstood and causes confusion. So what is the spiritual goal? To me, part of it is to understand that there is more than your separation. There's more than your reality. Step outside yourself and see that we are one. That's where we all originate. We're made of the same stardust material. But there's another part that also says, why are you here? Why were you born? And that's the steps of Neptune, is to descend into time, to descend into the body, and to accept the challenge of incarnation.
Yeah, and fairly misunderstood in this age of
because
with this separation of mind and spirit, or body and spirit, you might say. It's been
absolutely, and that's exactly what all our religions. It doesn't matter if you're a Buddhist or if you're a Muslim or if you are a New Ager. We are separating the body from the spirit. And the reason is that deep down, we struggle with suffering. And from a Neptune point of view, if you remember the womb and you remember oneness, there's no need to fight. There's no need to hurt. There's no need for war. There's no need to kill an animal to feed yourself. So the challenge, of course, is how to solve suffering. And one of the Neptunian way is then to escape.
Yeah, it's not
time and space.
Yeah.
and the way we do it is that we use spirituality as an escape. We go to our monasteries, or we fast and to go through cleanses, or we meditate. We do all these things. Why?
Well,
because we want to try to solve suffering. Anything we do, anything that humanity has tried to do has been to eliminate suffering.
Yeah.
Whether we want to be rich. Go ahead.
Yeah. Because I get some associations when you talk, and it reminded me a lot about the relationship between astrology and religion, actually, because there's, you know, religion wants to kind of separate from astrology, but we know, we traveled together in Israel and we saw that there are so many signs that astrology used to be an integral part of the spiritual practices. And I remember meeting a man on a plane on the way to South Africa, and he was a practicing Muslim. And we were talking about the religious aspect of it. He was definitely somewhat of a mystic. And he said, no, we don't use astrology in Islam. And I knew why, but I just wanted to hear him say it himself. And he said, no, because we want to trust God in everything we do. And, you know, just surrender, which is a very, very difficult concept, you know, like what do we surrender to? But the whole non-dualism of spirituality must include, for instance, a spiritual science like astrology, but used also with the conscience or the consciousness of spirituality, that eventually there will have to be also, you will also have to learn to surrender, you know, no matter how your chart is or transits are or whatever it is, you know, like there's a middle path here somewhere waiting for us.
Well, that's why, you know, when you look at your chart, you can see very challenging things, but you can work on yourself and you can better understand what the intention is behind your chart instead of saying, you know, I have a Mars square Saturn and I'm going to have anger issues. Well, if you understand why and how to use that more productively, you can better use that.
Mm.
But, you know, every religion, especially today, is going to create that split between time and space. And I don't want to get into all that aspect of philosophy. I want to focus on the astrology. But if we look at Neptune ruling Pisces and ruling the 12th house, we understand that it's both the end of the wheel, right? It's the 12th house, it's the completion of a cycle, but it's also the womb of the new cycle. So part of what's so complex about this archetype is that it's both a beginning and an ending.
Mm.
And there's something that dissolves and there's something that is seeded that will prepare you for the first house experience. But again, what is Neptune? You know, if we want to kind of summarize it, how do we deal with it? Understand that Neptune connects you to what came before you. And it represents all the things you cannot control, including the fact that the earth spins on itself and every morning the sun rises and you're not in control of that.
Yeah.
You're not, you know, there's no one pulling a rope to have the sun rise today. It just happens. It just happens that you have 5 fingers. You know, who made that? You don't know. I mean, that's how you end up being born. So all the things that are and that you meet, you know, you meet the trees are green and the sky is blue. Why? So you can get to the science. It's because that's how light is reflected. But through Neptune, we come to accept what is and accept that the world is what it is. And we work with what we have. We work with our bodies, we work with our minds, we work with our resources, and we get better. We improve because when you get to the first house, you're born and then you start to see, I have a body, I can lift things, I can work and plant seeds and get food, and I can travel. And so you start to develop skills and capacities until you reach the 6th house and the sign of Virgo, which is the master of skills. You know, Virgos are usually so talented, so skilled, so beautiful, even aesthetically. And they can do anything. Because what is the difference between Virgo and Pisces? I'll give you a slide.
All right. Okay.
That's the reality.
Yeah. Makes sense. Absolutely.
So Pisces is anything at its raw form. Neptune is the jungle. It's anything that is not necessarily hospitable. That is primal. It's a wild animal. It's a jungle. It's the ocean. It's bigger than you. It's nature. But Virgo is okay. I'm going to use that to my advantage.
I'm going to trim it.
I'm going to trim it. I'm going to organize it. I'm going to start agriculture instead of relying on trees to randomly give me fruits. I'm going to compartmentalize, organize, and make sure that it's sustainably supporting me. Now you're going to say, so which one is better? And some people will say, I want to live like the Pisces way. And some people will say, I want to live like the Virgo way. And the truth is what? If we speak of the eternal truth.
Well, the truth is, if you don't cultivate the resources, they will be subject to the second law of thermodynamics, and they will just wither. So we have a responsibility to actually use our skills and do what we can.
Exactly. So we call this meeting the divine halfway. And so this is why there's a natural polarity between Virgo and Pisces, between Mercury and Neptune. Neptune is what is not up to you, what is larger than you, and what can even be a mystery to you because you cannot figure it out. And Virgo is all the things that are up to you. If you don't pay attention to what you're eating, you're going to have a stomach problem. If you don't cut your hair, you're going to have parasites and be unhealthy. So all the self-care, all the work, Virgo, that needs to be done is part of that archetype. But if we speak of the truth, look at the whole wheel. The truth is in the combination of everything. And so the truth includes having to separate, having to stand on your own, and having to take responsibility over your life, and having to face your own limitations. Why is there suffering? Part of the reason, if we can answer that at all, but at least touch on it.
That's a very big question, but of course, a lot of the suffering is because there's neglect.
One of it is neglect, but one of it is also imperfection.
Like life in general will never be perfect. It will always be slightly imperfect.
Why are we evolving?
Because of imperfection.
I mean, why are we reincarnating? Why is there evolutionary astrology? Right? If we were only relying on Neptune, there would be no motion. There would be no change. You would be still, silent, and permanent. Everything would be forever, always, everywhere.
Yeah, like the concept of heaven that is being promoted. That would be like a Neptunian thing. Welcome to heaven. You're going to live forever. You'll be eternally happy.
And what does that mean? From a Neptune point of view, all of us have Neptune in our chart, and we're yearning for it. We're remembering it. And that's what motivates us. That's why we want to find solutions. When we see war, or when we see disease, or when we see abuse, we want to fix it. We want to create laws. And that's normal. That's what we should do. But there's this illusion that, okay, if I get rich, then I'm going to be above suffering.
Yeah.
If I find the perfect relationship, I'm going to be above suffering. No. If you meditate, that's when you're going to be above suffering. No, that's not enough. If you never respond to anger and negative emotions, that's how you're going to resolve suffering. So anyone, everywhere, is trying to find the solution to suffering. And what is Neptune saying? Good try.
Well, you probably heard of Ken Wilber. I mean, you used to live in Boulder, and he's pretty big up there. He has this one little quote that stayed with me for a long time, because I'm the practical non-dualism would be all inclusive. It would include all the levels. And he said that transcend and include. That's his thing, like you include everything. You can transcend, of course, and try to move beyond your limitations, for instance, but you have to include everything in life. There's no Puritanism in that statement. But of course, I think the Puritanism wants us to just, living with suffering, it doesn't mean you're unhappy. That's the different thing there, like if you can understand, like personally, especially for me, the way that I see what is it that really evolves me in my life. Well, it's the point of suffering that really fuels an inspiration to get to know myself better or learn more about certain subjects, or it does really have evolutionary power to it. And
that's the thing.
Yeah.
But you have to walk that thin line between understanding that life includes suffering without glorifying suffering.
Oh, that would mean masochism.
Yeah, but it's also there.
Yeah.
Masochism is part of Neptune, because Neptune, how do we become masochists from a Neptune point of view? It's the martyrdom. And it says, I can take it. I'm invincible. You hurt me, but I'm not hurt. You beat me, but I'm not dead. And so there is pride in feeling that you are above suffering. You feel holy, you feel superior. But in reality, walking that thin line is to acknowledge that you do have a moon, and that person fucking hurt you. And if you're not angry, well, maybe you have anesthetized yourself. Maybe you've numbed yourself. Maybe you are a spiritual bypasser.
Exactly. And there's some sort of spiritual competition in being above everything. Sometimes you run into this. But I remember that there's a brilliant book by Liz Green. It's called The Inner Planets. And there's a paragraph in that book where she says, well, that will teach you to not ignore the inner planets. I thought that was such a brilliant way of saying it, because you can't ignore the inner planets, your own personal needs, your moon, your Venus, anything that is more, less subtle in its energy. Anger is difficult, though, for people.
Yeah, but there was an experiment. They were trying to grow. I mean, they are already doing it. Growing plant in a hydroponic environment, which basically means that it's an insular system where the plants are, grown, cultivated in a safe environment with hydroponics, which is eliminating all the bugs. And so you feed all the plants the nutrients, and you don't need pesticides because it's protected. So there's no need to kill bugs, and there's no need to poison the plants. And the plants naturally grow in that very safe environment. And what did they find out? That the plant had only half of the nutrients.
Really?
That a plant that grows in the soil in normal conditions and has to fight parasites and has to fight weather conditions is actually creating more vitamins.
That is so interesting. Wow.
So that, what do we say? I mean, the stress, the plant that is under stress is going to be richer in content. And why is that? It's because of evolution. Because we do need to face the stresses and the risk of suffering in order to be able to get smarter, to be stronger, to solve solutions, to become more sophisticated. So the challenge constantly forces to get better at living.
You know, that is so interesting because people struggle so much with this concept of sin. Like, I probably did something wrong in my last life, and that's why I have to endure this terrible karma in this lifetime. But seeing it from this point of view, you know, it really aids in eliminating Puritanism away from, you know, the whole consciousness. I see this as a huge problem, you know, for people in general, even, you know, even they project it into the world of astrology a lot. And then you kind of like go with the concept of suffering as some sort of weird punishment instead of being an agent of growth. Even though sometimes you have to question as well, my goodness, that like the amount of suffering some people have to go through, it's hard to kind of like rationalize it and create, you know.
Let's simplify. What is suffering? Suffering tells you, it's like a red alarm that you need to work on something, that there's an imperfection. So suffering is not there to stay. Suffering is like a signal that you need to work on something, that something's missing, something's lacking. So you're not perpetuating it, you're solving it. You should be. Nobody, it's uncomfortable to suffer. That's why you want to resolve it. But you should not be, from a Neptune point of view, the low vibration of Neptune is what? That I cannot tolerate suffering. And that's why I will identify with every victim. That's why many Neptunian people don't want to be here. They don't want to incarnate. They feel that this life is too much for them. And that will apply to people with strong 12th house, with strong Neptunian on angles or, you know, powerful aspects. That feeling that I don't want to be in time and space. I don't want this challenge. I want to go back to the womb. I want to go back to heaven. I want to go back to paradise. And what you're doing here is you're basically violating the contract. The contract that there's work to be done here. There's Virgo work to be done here. And you have to go through the stress, and you have to go through the jungle and find your way. And that is the misconception, is that Neptune wants to take you beyond your ego. It's only half of the reality. The other reality is that Neptune gave you an ego.
Yeah, that's non-dualism in practical terms.
And so once you accept your ego, you also accept that you do need to take care of yourself, that you do need, you know, to face the challenges. And that can also mean that you're going to compete for resources. Now, what's the difference? just to illustrate that, what's the difference between today's consumerism and, let's say, the indigenous way of consumerism? Today, when we go to the supermarket and we buy a piece of meat in a package, our ego says, you know, I worked hard, I can pay for it, it's mine, and I'm going to eat it.
Yeah.
And I want more. And I'm entitled to this and this and that. So what is the indigenous way? The indigenous, many of them were hunters. And they also killed animals to eat and have meat. But the difference is that they understood, on the one hand, that they had to do it.
Yeah.
That you cannot not eat. But they also understood that they were the animal, that they honor the animal, and they don't see themselves as separate. So on the one hand, you are separate because you need to eat and you're going to kill in order to eat. And on the other hand, you also bless and you don't take it for granted. And you honor the process. And there's suffering involved. There is suffering, there's blood that's being spilled. Anything you eat is going to cause suffering.
Yeah, that's a big thing these days because of the ongoing eco crisis that we have. And there's I stumbled over this concept the other day, eco grief. Like people are grieving, like on a very deep level. But I think the difference between the consumer that goes entitled into the store and just wants, his beef, and the Indian who shoots the prey and pays respect to his kill is respect. That's the little thing that's missing here. Like and I think that sort of, it's kind of like ongoing cognitive dissonance happening in all of us, because we know deep inside that I don't know what it took to make this phone, but I'm sure it wasn't that good,
I mean, exactly.
So,
but at the same time, if we are approaching this from a spiritual point of view, I can understand why people become greedy.
Yeah, definitely. That's the
on that level, we can even go there and understand that nobody asked to have an ego. I will say it's one of the hardest things spiritually is to be able to have a healthy ego. And life would be so much easier without an ego. You wouldn't have to fight anyone. You wouldn't have to stress out. You would just be in that meditative bliss. I mean, who doesn't want that? Who wants to go out and sweat and have to compete and pay the rent and go through the motion of building yourself and surviving? Nobody wants that. It's pain. But like you say, the difference in how do we gain respect, how do we respect the animal, is that we understand that that animal is conscious. We understand that that tree is conscious. That tree worked hard to be a tree.
Yeah.
And I'm not so different from that tree. And yet I'm going to chop it because I need a piece of furniture. And I'm going to need to build my house. So what do? Am I building a house, or am I going to live under the rain and suffer from?
It's an impossible situation in a way, because
we go back to this. We go back to this.
Yeah.
Managing resources.
There is something, I've been thinking a lot due to this eco grief. I'm feeling it too. I'm a big fan of David Attenborough, and I saw that last Netflix documentary he made, and I almost came halfway through, and then I was just like, I can't see this, and this is too sad, But I've been thinking a lot about this kind of like existential guilt about being here and consuming. I give off carbon dioxide, I'm just breathing, and then I'm
exactly
the eco balance. Exactly. I could be eating air and I would still consume something. I would still be consuming something. And I think, if I take away my guilt, I was given this life in gift. I really appreciate being here. It's a great thing. I wish I will be 120 years, because it's so fascinating. But if I take away that guilt, that is so fundamental to Christianity, for instance, that we are born in sin, That's a thing that I think people.
All religions, most religions.
I think it's such a bad thing to tell people
Because what is the sin? It's
I would-
incarnating. It's incarnating.
From a religious perspective, you mean?
Yeah,
Just
exactly. And so the very fact that you are born, you are going to have to consume.
yeah.
But then we get into the solar principle. And what is the solar principle? Is that you consume, but you give something
You
back.
give back, yeah, exactly. That's what you
And
do.
you create, and you give birth, and you help life.
You participate.
You participate.
Participate.
That's one, if we speak about the Neptune guilt,
Mm-hmm.
the Neptune sin, not guilt, but the sin, it's the sin of not participating, of not wanting to have an ego, and not wanting to consume, and not wanting to take the stage, and not wanting to take the risk, and not wanting to cut the flower, and to have to kill in order for you to survive. So it's the guilt of non-participation. And that's the difference between Neptune and the sun, because the sun says, and that's why the lion is represented by the sun, and the lion can be very gentle and very fierce. And what is the principle of the sun is that there's going to be collateral damage. There is going to be blood.
Yeah.
But there is a motion, there is a purpose in all of this to move to the next step, to create more life, to enhance life. And I think that is the deeper spiritual realization, is that you have to be both the Pisces and the Leo.
Yeah, that's what there's a natural inconjunct between these two, and it's a hard stretch to walk. They are far away from each other in terms of a natural expression.
Yeah. And so, looking at the different stages, when we look at Neptune, we start from this innocence, because it's the stage where we still think we're in the womb. And there's people who are born in this stage are people who can be defenseless, and they trust everybody, and they think that the oneness is still all that there is. So you will see Neptunian people who don't have a defense mechanism. They are going to be bullied at school eventually. They are going to be disappointed. Why? And that's what you said earlier when we talked about karma. They can they move to the second phase, and they lose their innocence, and they experience suffering, and people take advantage of them, or they get bullied at school, or they didn't put sunscreen and they get burned, and they kiss someone who has COVID and they're in the hospital now. Why? Because they don't realize that life is imperfect, that there is suffering, and that you need to work to protect yourself. So these folks are not suffering because they were, mean people in a past life, or because they raped someone.
Yeah.
They suffer because they are not understanding the need for separation.
It's breaking up a little bit here. I think they don't understand the need for separation. You were breaking up a bit, Maurice.
So they're not incarnating. They want to stay in the womb. And so when you are incarnating, you are suddenly hit with challenges. You have to wear clothes.
Yeah.
because the mosquitoes will bite you, or because there's too much sun or there's too much rain. You have to build shelter. Otherwise, again, you're overexposed. So, from an innocent point of view, I would rather be on the beach, live under a coconut, and eat, mangoes from the tree. But then what happens? I eat the worm, I eat parasites, and I start to have an indigestion. Whose fault is it?
Well,
Right?
when you talk about immunity, because that's something you really focus on with in the book in particular, and it's very interesting because I came to see. I've been thinking about this for years because of the sensitivity issues that a lot of people have. We're so hypersensitive, and it's a classical Neptune problem actually to be in many places at the same time. And sensitive people need to strengthen their psychological immunity. So I tend to see the immune system as something much more than
Absolutely.
the system, right? It's like Neptune for me describes the psychological and spiritual immune system,
Absolutely.
and your capacity to kind of be conscious of whatever moves into your field in one way or another. And when you were talking about immune system, it reminded me, my mother is born far north. It's super harsh up there. But she has like the best immune system. It's like completely like up and running. Like we're northerners. We're not used to getting fruit falling into our heads.
Yep.
We don't
Yeah.
live around
Yeah.
the equator.
Nothing grows.
Nothing grows here. It's like you get little cabbages like this. It's nothing. It's
Yeah.
really like
Yeah.
planting them for
I learned a lot. I learned a lot about that when I came to Norway and we had
yeah.
that trip to
Mm-hmm.
the lab to the Sami people,
Hard.
because it hit me
Yeah.
that these folks live on ice and they cannot be vegan. It's not sustainable. They
It's
have to kill.
it's not truth actually to be vegan there. Like if you look at the environment, it wouldn't be a truthful thing to be vegan
Yeah.
unless you had the option and you really wanted to. But if you look at nature would offer you the reindeer, the fish, the proteins and the fat.
Yeah.
Basically, that's what you need.
And that's true for all indigenous people living in northern latitude, whether it's Siberian, whether it's the Inuits. They face the same issues.
Mm.
But the education that needs to come in, when we were with the Sami people, on the one hand, they were hunters, but they had a temple for the salmon, and
Mm.
they had a temple for the reindeer. And of course, today it's different and it's taken more for granted, and it's not as connected to nature. But there's a natural understanding that life is cyclical, and that there is a reluctance to do this hard work and to be in the place where we would be in harmony and there would be no suffering and there would be no blood spill and we would all be still and silent. But that's not what our chart is saying. That's not what
No,
the
that's true.
truth is saying.
Yeah.
And so when we look at from an evolutionary point of view and we see people are in trouble, they suffer in
Yes.
their relationships or they can't find a job, like you said, it's not necessarily misfortune because they pay for you
Some bad
know
karma or some punishment.
something terrible, a
Mm.
punishment. It's not a punishment.
No.
It's a lesson. It's a very, very big difference.
There's
For
a
some, it will be karmic. Some people do need to purge some karmic debt,
yeah.
but it's a much smaller portion
Yes,
of
indeed.
what the real thing is. And I'm looking at people, look at the 12th house and Neptune as something that can be very debilitating because we don't have control. You know, we're referred to Neptune as the fog, we're to confusion, and we refer the 12th house to imprisonment and addictions, which is true. there is that, but we need to understand the why. Like, why do we react that way with Neptune?
But I think the
And
first stages of Neptune is very difficult. You have people being trapped without any options, like they don't have an alternative. You have a very good comparison in the book where you compare it with childhood, actually. You're being trapped you're at the mercy of your parents. You can't just pack your bags and leave. If that initial pull is abusive and the child is stuck in it, it doesn't have a free will to get up and leave. And that's why, these initial stages of the Neptunian kind of unfolding is incredibly hard for people to get beyond, especially if you look at the socio-political environment on Earth today. People are stuck in the most terrible situations, where they don't have
absolutely,
they don't have the right passport, for instance, so they can't
exactly,
get up
absolutely.
and.
But there goes the third stage. And the third stage is the polarity of Virgo that says you can increase your immunity if you do certain things, if you take certain steps, you can improve your conditions. And that is a very important statement, especially if you speak to someone who's been victimized. We speak about colonialism, and how devastating that was to indigenous cultures. We speak about victims of rape. We speak about diseases, all the suffering that's in this world. If we accept our incarnation and if we accept the challenge of having an ego, then we can build our immunity. And you speak of today, people, the 5G and being on airplanes and being bombarded with stimulation and stresses. There's so much we're going through in one lifetime. We're packing 10 lifetimes in one. With we live longer and we do 10 times more than we ever used to. Obviously, that's going to lead to an overwhelm.
Oh, definitely.
And that's Neptune. You're overwhelmed. Like, I don't have enough hours a day to finish all my tasks. But that's what Neptune Virgo teaches you. Upgrade your immunity. Upgrade your psychological, your spiritual, and your physical immunity. So you'll be able to develop a system that will prepare you for those next challenges.
Absolutely.
And I think even COVID is related to that.
Definitely. I mean, this is such a Neptunian kind of condition as well. Like we've said, if you follow the lunations and you sort of saw when it went, I almost said when it went viral, when it went, global, there was this long run of Mercury going retrograde into Pisces. And then again, Ceres also, she was going retrograde at the exact same space that Neptune occupied for its retrogradation, and the full moons and now Jupiter and then Mars. We had all these planets activating Pisces, and then there were new mutations, and there were like all kinds of new situations you had to adapt to. For, of course, a little bit depending on where you were, but it was pretty much the same for everyone. We had to be adaptable. We had to adapt really quickly. Oh yeah, so today we can't do this, but yesterday we could do that. And what's the rules now? Did you get it? Like you always have to be like feeling in. You have to be present in a way, and that's also part of strengthening immunity because, like you can sense a lot. You can sense danger, right? You can sense illness. If you just use your senses, you can feel a lot of energy. If you
or you can get the first dose of suffering, something that makes you feel bad, makes you feel sad, makes you feel nauseous, whether it's emotional or physical. And that can be a trigger to make you want to live better, make better decisions. But like you say, we are born into this reality in the 21st century. That is what is available to us. Let's make the best of what we have. And um, currently you have so many, obviously, different sides to how to solve the COVID crisis,
Mm.
because we all want to find a solution, we all want to find the causes. But even if we go beyond the conspiracies of whether it was created in a lab or whether it's exaggerated and it doesn't exist, deep into this collective drama, what we're working on, whether you get vaccinated or not, we're working on immunity.
Mm.
And it's both a physical immunity and it's an intellectual and spiritual immunity.
Okay.
And that's, if we speak about that example of the hydroponic, through this, we are going to create, better ways of coping and better ways of discriminating, whether it's discriminating corruption, the abuse of government with mass surveillance, and jumping on that opportunity to track people everywhere, and at the same time, we're basically moving on to a new level of being. And no
Mm.
surprise, Neptune is in Pisces during this whole
Yeah.
time,
Mm.
and like you say, activated by
A little
all this.
more. So I think, what really struck me with the whole COVID thing is that how contagious we all are. I knew that from before, but mentally speaking, like we are so contagious, and we are using our participation many times very subconsciously, like without really knowing what we put out into the world. We're not conscious of our participation or our, like, what am I really bringing into this space? And so for me, that this health crisis, the earth is in some sort of global health crisis no matter what. We are overpopulated and we are overflooded with information all the time, which I think is really, really tiresome for a lot of us. I see how it's really tearing people down, this constant flood of news. Like, I've been observing my own parents, and I like, they're pretty strong, but they get influenced, like super influenced. And before the COVID as well, I felt this fatigue in the world spirit. Like, I think we're getting tired. We need to slow down a little bit and take more time to process and take more time to feel in and just stay a little bit more in our own space and not be so decentralized all the time, pulled out into everything. So,
Yeah, I mean, both the way the virus spread so quickly
yeah,
physically, like we say, it's very Neptunian. It knows no nationality, it
nope.
knows no border, and in no time, it was everywhere.
Yeah.
And then the same virus contamination of opinion and misinformation and people um, just following whatever they read anywhere in a very indiscriminate way. So all this shows breakdowns of immunity. And
Yes.
at the same time, you say we're overwhelmed. I'm saying, yes, we need to slow down and regroup.
Mm.
But I'm also saying we're building a more sophisticated computer
Yeah, definitely.
that will be able to handle more input, that will
Absolutely.
be able not to feel overwhelmed.
Mm.
So the process of being overwhelmed shows our infancy in
Mm.
all of this.
Yeah, definitely. Well,
And so
certain
I want to show
this one.
an example, a quick example. This is the chart of Biden.
Oh, here's okay. So in 1972, he won the Senate.
He won the Senate, and Neptune was on his ascendant.
Ah, there you go. That's interesting.
And he's a Pac 12 house, right?
Yeah.
So many people say you have 12 house planet, you're going to be an alcoholic in jail. Not always, obviously, Because the 12th house and Neptune has to do with the ability to touch on collective causes, to go beyond the self to a larger public arena. And you can succeed with these transits if you accept the challenge of dealing with collective needs. So what happened, in 1972 is that he won, but in a very Neptunian way, he won against expectations. Nobody thought that this 30-year-old would be able to make it. He had a much tougher opponent, and one thing led to another in a very Neptunian way, unexpected twists and turns that he adapted to, that he ended up winning. And the message is just do what you're meant to do. Just contribute. Just accept your incarnation. Accept that you have a job to do. The rest will follow.
Yeah.
Now, what happened is that 2 months after he was elected, he lost his wife and
That's
his
true.
daughter.
He lost his family.
In a car accident.
Yeah.
So, in a very Neptunian way, it was both this greatest victory and this greatest loss. And we can analyze it. He had Pluto there on Neptune. There were many other factors.
Yeah. Neptune's nodal axis.
Yeah. And then now in 2020, where was Neptune?
Oh,
the angles again.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
So he had two of his biggest victories with Neptune on the angles. And when he won the vice presidency with Obama in 2008, Neptune was in Aquarius, squaring all his Scorpio planets. So what I'm trying to say is that if you're doing your work and if you're accepting your incarnation, but at the same time accepting that it's not just about you, that you are serving a greater purpose. Even in eating every morning, in waking up every morning and getting out of bed. Bed is Neptune. You want to stay in bed.
Sleep is Neptune.
Yeah. You want to be away from the stresses. What happens when you wake up in the morning? The sun is up. So you have to take on the solar challenge of waking up and doing what you're called to do.
No matter what the moon is. It's like full moon or not. I think a lot of people are very much into we see that in the work as well, like how the rhythms of life is something that we need to kind of get acquainted with. And
it can feel like that sometimes.
What?
It can feel like this wave.
Oh, definitely.
So who's going to win here?
Well,
you can either drown or get a surfboard and go very far, supported by the currents.
Supported by the current, yeah.
That's Neptune.
And I guess that's what you learned when you wrote the book, because you surfed the wave, didn't you? You just went on to a wave in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is that when you are we call this to be in sync with your life. Most of us are fighting our own life. We're not fighting other people. We're fighting ourselves. We're fighting our fate. Why don't I have this? And why, do we have this government? And why do we... The list is long. The moment you say yes to life, not in a naive way, not in with your blinders to only see the good stuff. The moment you say yes to the opportunity and the challenge together, that's when you find happiness. And I would say that is what Neptune's about. Neptune is the science of happiness.
Oh, that's beautiful. Wow, that's like the more positive expression of it. Because right now Jupiter is in Pisces, and it will stay there for a little while. So I guess we get opportunities to surf our waves during this time,
And we have this this important conjunction. Where did I put it? I had it here. Sorry. Let me find. We have Neptune definitely now in Pisces, and I think there's a great shift already happening. I don't know if you feel it collectively.
Well, we certainly felt it
it
here.
does seem like. How so?
No, it was the National Day, and
Oh, you mean
in Norway, yeah. And for the first time, for a very long time, there was this sense of freedom in the air. I felt like people were really like, oh, COVID or not, we're gonna walk around, like they even had parades. They were, of course, not completely entirely legal, but we were parading, it's like, yay. So it was there was like this feeling of celebration, like there was some new wind coming in. And Jupiter will square the natal nodal axis, the transiting nodal axis as well. So there's like this, I mean, Jupiter for me, it's always been a very benevolent kind of force of nature, even though it has its challenges, but, definitely. But there's this.
So I will, for those who are interested, I will be offering a free presentation on Jupiter this weekend on Sunday.
Wonderful. On Jupiter in Pisces or Jupiter in general?
Yeah. Jupiter in Pisces and the transits ahead, and especially this transit, because next year Jupiter will conjunct Neptune. So you have the two rulers of Pisces together at 23 degrees Pisces. And look, interestingly, as Jupiter and Neptune are at 23 on that day, you have the Sun at 22, you have the nodes at 22, you have Saturn at 23. So you have a whole alignment of planets on those degrees.
20, yeah.
And this will definitely be, a moment of make or break, so to speak. But I do hope it will, it will bear at least part of its positive fruits. And one of the things that Jupiter and Neptune brings, we speak about the truth, it brings illusion and truth side to side.
Yeah.
And this basically translates into inflation, deflation. If we examine previous cycles of Jupiter and Neptune, the last one was in 2009, right after the economic crash. So it's a very powerful wave. Talk about a wave. It's a Jupiterian wave. And it can take us very far. It can be a spiritual realization. But if we are not, if we are projecting, if we are imposing our truth and not really tuning in, it will shrink everything. It's going to create.
Yeah, that's so common. It's shoehorning the truth. It's almost like the stepsister of Cinderella who's trying on that shoe and she wants to make it fit, like I really want to make the shoe fit. But that's not going to work with Neptune eventually. So, but it's, I was just writing about this today, how difficult it sometimes can be to decipher truth from illusion. We've been entertaining illusion and being entertained by illusion for such a long time. So this.
So what do we do? we try it.
Yeah, we have to try it and see if it works or not. Like you don't know
That's the bottom
you
line.
tried. Yeah, that's true.
Because we cannot know ahead of time.
No, we can't.
That's part of our egoic limitation. We
Mm.
have to accept that it is trial and error.
That is so beautifully said, because I think so many times when people wake up after trying out one of their illusions that they feel pretty stupid and they wish they hadn't done it. Like, I wish I could have saved myself for so much trouble. But then again, I think that's the most beautiful thing with that book. It's very healing. Neptune is difficult to handle. It's difficult to live with. And just this third stage of developing immunity and having, the capacity to discriminate between truth and, learning to use your capacity to understand things. At least from my point of view, it's been very, very helpful. I do have a massive, Neptunian stuff going on in my own chart, and it really helped me to kind of like not just accept responsibility, finish my sentences, because I have Mercury in Pisces, and not everybody's telepathic, as I might assume sometimes. And it really helped me ground more, actually, and actually also just do it, just whatever you have, use whatever you have, and remember, work on it. It's not a failure, even though it's difficult. And that was very, very helpful. So for all of you listening, you should definitely get this book. It's a very, very practical guide. Living well
And
with Neptune.
And it's in every house and sign.
Yeah.
So planets in Pisces in the 12th, and then Neptune placements in houses. So you can personalize this, because we talked a lot about very abstract and overreaching themes, but it gets more specific in the book. So I also, if people resonate with this line of thought and this perspective, consider full training in evolutionary astrology from this perspective. Touch the star and remember the truth that in a star knowledge is so rich, and you speak about the healing. There's so much healing from really using astrology productively.
Definitely. And I can definitely vouch for this class, because I took it myself, of course, in a previous cycle. But you were the one person I resonated with when I was, wanting to go deeper into my studies. And I really, really appreciated it. And the fun thing and the beautiful thing with astrology, just like this book, it's like seeds that are dripped into your consciousness, and then it blossoms it sprouts into a tree that grows in me. So my knowledge about Neptune has really been, like, oh yeah, it's an inspiring ride. So your book is seeding things in my mind. So I'm very grateful for that book. And definitely, I hope people will sign up for your class, because today it's important to have good education in the world of astrology, especially today when we see it's being watered out a little bit.
Well, I think one of the problems with studying astrology is that you can study it in a very compartmentalized way. You can learn about Neptune, you can learn about the yards, and you can learn about Chiron. One of the big problems is people have a hard time putting it together.
Yeah.
How to actually synthesize and actually speak to a person without confusing them even more. So the rigor of a course and having a feedback mechanism and routine study puts all these pieces together, organizes it so you can master the knowledge.
Well, that's your legacy in the world of astrology, Maurice. You've definitely taken it to the next level. That's what I feel, and I'm super grateful for everything that I've experienced just on our journeys and learning this particular method of evolutionary astrology that you teach. I like it a lot. It's very grounded. It's very helpful. And there's a lot of practice involved. So I have to do a lot of charts. And that's why it's so beneficial. So definitely something.
And thank you, Sol, for all the work that you're doing and spearheading astrology in Norway and beyond. And it's not easy, a single mom, being able to compute everything and make a living out of this, taking the challenge to really, and the courage to really take this on. Talk about, following the calling and not knowing what's ahead of you
at all,
but knowing in your heart that it's true, knowing that I can't turn away from this even if it seems impossible.
I can't turn away even if I tried turning away from it, but I realized that love is like a boomerang. It just it boomerangs back. And if you love something, and I do love astrology, it's so beautiful, so it just came bouncing back on me. So I'm very grateful. What a great way to live a life. I mean, we will never be bored, that's for sure. So thank you very much for coming here today. I will make sure that all the links and everything is underneath the little thing on YouTube, and it will also be available on Spotify, etc., and so forth. Thank you, Maurice. It was a pleasure to have you.
Blessings to everyone. Stay healthy and master happiness, says Neptune.